All right, well, we are continuing into our final week of our Bad Blood series. And so we are jumping into this last week where we are going to talk about boundaries. And so we have walked through over the course of the last several weeks how kind of what we believe God's plan is for our relationships and what we do when we inevitably get some bad blood in our relationships. And what we mean by bad blood is simply conflict. We all get normal kinds of conflict in our relationships, from our relationships with our parents or our children to our relationships with our spouses, our coworkers, our bosses, whoever it may be. At some point in time, we usually have conflict in our relationships. And almost at every point in time, we have conflict somewhere in our relationships. I grew up in a family that enjoyed the conflict. And so have y'all ever seen the movie Braveheart? Y'all ever seen the movie Braveheart? You remember the part where like he's riding off into battle, he's got his face painted, and they yell at him, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm going to pick a fight." Right? Y'all remember that part? That was my childhood. And so, I'm just kidding. But we want to know, how do we handle conflict when it arises? And you see, if we want to control our relationships and make sure that they always work the way that we want them to work, you will never be happy. I don't know if you've learned that, but you can't control other people. And if you could control other people, it would cease being an enjoyable relationship, and you would move on to another relationship in which you couldn't control. Perhaps that's why God gave us free will. Instead of controlling us and everything that we would do by setting parameters so strict that we couldn't stray from them, instead it becomes an actual and real relationship because there is choice and not control in there. You see, we want to have peace, and we told you up front. Let's look at Romans chapter 12, verse 18 again. Romans 12, 18. And it is possible, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, we admitted that we can't live at peace with everyone. Perhaps we could. Maybe in some sort of perfect, idealized world, we could live at peace with everyone. But what God is calling us to in this verse is to do everything that we can, as far as it depends on you, as far as it depends on me, live at peace with everyone. But in a relationship, there is a variable that you cannot control, and that is the other person. And so the question for us this morning is, what do you do when you've done everything that you know to do? What do you do in the midst of that relationship when you finally reach this place? I've told you over and over for 3 weeks now, you can have peace about the relationship without having peace in the relationship. But that is a hard truth to learn because we want all of our relationships to come back to a place of peace. That's why we talked about, when we looked in the verses in Matthew in 5 and 18, if someone has wronged us, we are supposed to go to them to seek reconciliation. But if we are the one who has done the wronging, we're supposed to go to them and repent and seek reconciliation because we want to live at peace in our relationships. But sometimes, and many of us, have experienced those relationships where we have done everything we know how to do, but there seems to be no peace to be had. Right? Has anybody ever experienced that? No? Oh, cool. Well, we'll just end it right here. We'll just do the offering again and we'll go home. I'm just kidding. All right. So I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think about boundaries and how to explain it. And I've told you this story once before, but I was at Nikki's graduation. Miss Pat made me think about it. Nikki graduated from the University of Georgia, and we were there for her graduation. And it is like 3.5 hours long. And for about 45 minutes of that 3.5 hours, my mother-in-law was trying to get me to show her exactly where Nikki was amongst the 10,000 graduates that were down there. And I've told you that I had LASIK surgery and that I can see a bird break wind in Cleveland. So I could see where she was, right? But I could not explain it to my mother-in-law. I did everything I knew to do. I told her, third section over, 3 rows back, 16 people in. I was trying everything I could. Then I came from the other side. I was like, all right, well, look, stage left. Now it's the second row over, and she's only 12 people in. It's less counting. That would be better, surely. We even got the binoculars up, and I held the binoculars stationary and looked through them and pointed at her, and then I held them real still and let her look through them and point. I was like, this one, I was probably pointing to, like, the sky. But anyway, I did everything I could do, and she just kept asking me, where is she, which one is she? And I just looked at her eventually and said, I don't think I can help you anymore. I don't know what I can do. I have done everything I know to do. I don't think I can do any more for you. I didn't say all this. I'm expounding for you. You're just going to have to enjoy the fact that the governor is about to say some words, and it's going to take him 2 hours to do so. And then we're going to go to a smaller graduation where I promise you will be able to see her, right? And so now that is a funny example. But the honest truth is that in a serious way in our relationships, we reach a point where we have done everything that we can do, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, and you have done everything that you know to do. Some of you have given everything you have to someone. Whether that's your physical stamina or your emotional self or your financial resources or just the length of your life, you have given it to someone else and they have taken and taken and taken and taken, and you have done everything that you know to possibly do, but there appears to be no end in sight. We will give everything sometimes, but I don't believe that that's how God calls us to live. What do we do when we've done all that we can do? You see, our relationship may never be the same again after we set up some boundaries. It may never be the same again after we set up some boundaries, and that causes mourning. That causes grief. That causes fear and anxiety that if I just continue to give in to this person, I never have to set up those boundaries. I can just keep giving and giving and giving and feeling good about myself maybe even, but ultimately I will be depleted to nothing and they will actually gain no benefit or no help because they will continue in the cycle that they have been in. And so this morning we're taking a serious look. I'm going to start with Proverbs 26:11, and we make sure not to share this verse on potluck Sundays. But Proverbs 26:11 says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. The word of God for the people of God. That's disgusting, right? As a dog returns to its vomit, fools repeat their folly. Have you ever seen a dog do that? Oh my gosh. It just makes me want to throw up just thinking about it, right? I'm kind of a sympathetic vomiter. And so I see this thing happening and it makes me sick. I want to go, somewhere else so I don't have to be around it. I can't stand to watch it. I certainly can't stand the sound of it, right? Right? We're going to need a bag down here. Yeah, we got 4 kids. You can't that doesn't scare you now. All right. And so, but we go to this place, and I'm drawing it out a little bit this morning because that is how disgusting it is when we repeat our follies over and over and over and over again. And when we enable other people to continue committing their follies over and over and over and over again. A fool repeats their folly as a dog returns to its vomit. Today, we're asking the question, when is enough actually enough? You see, I believe that there are many of us sitting out there right now, and I believe that all of us at some point in the future, we are going to need to know how to set boundaries between who we are and who someone else is and not go over those if we're going to have peace in our life. You see, you can have peace within your boundary, okay? You're not going to have peace inside someone else's boundary unless that person is healthy and whole. But if there is someone who is continually taking your peace by the way that they treat you or the things they ask you for or what they do over and over and over, if you place your life, your resources, your time and energy inside their boundary and live by their rules, you will never have peace. And if God is calling us to live at peace with everyone, I don't think that God is calling you to live a life that never has peace. Here's what I love about this verse, 26:11. Not just that it's gross, excuse me, but why, I was thinking, I was like, I'm sure we don't have any veterinarians that I know of in the congregation, so I don't know exactly why a dog goes and does that, but I do know that it's cleaning it up, right? Like it's gross and it's disgusting. But what's even more gross is when another dog comes over and cleans it up for him, which is what you do. Which is what I do when we go to someone else's folly and continually clean it up for them. Uh-oh. Do we need a bag? Okay. All right. We'll stop talking about it now, or it's going to get real. Okay. So we stop going to other people's folly. You see, when we continue to do that, it's just like what this paragraph is saying, except we're not the actual dog. We are now just that dog's buddy, that dog's mama, that dog's daddy, that dog's brother or sister, and we are going back and cleaning up what has taken place. When you overfunction for someone else, you are being unfaithful. Isn't that hard to hear? I even thought about scratching it out of my notes because I didn't want to get any emails about it. When we overfunction for other people, we are being unfaithful to yourself, to them, and to all the people who love and care about them and who love and care about you. And you will never have peace. You will never have peace. You will continue to have heartache in that relationship. You can have peace inside of your boundary, but you cannot have peace inside of theirs. Now, there's only so much we can do on a morning here together and in a short 55-minute sermon. But there is a book. There is a book by Cloud and Townsend, Dr. Henry Cloud, and the other author's last name is Townsend, and it's just simply called Boundaries. It's faith-based with psychology as well, but they have a whole series, boundaries with kids, boundaries with teens, boundaries with parents even, I think. There's boundaries in the workplace. There's a whole series of them. So if you seriously are struggling with this, there are some more resources out there for you to look at and to think about and to explore. So we're going to jump into Galatians 6. Galatians 6, I'm going to begin throwing a few of them up on the screen. If you want to flip along with me, again, it's Galatians 6. We're going to look at verses 2 through 5. You see, I believe, we look at this first verse, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. You see, I think we have believed for a long time that as a good Christian, I'm just supposed to make myself a doormat. I'm supposed to make myself do whatever I possibly can for that other person. No matter what they ask, I should just go and do it. We extrapolate this from some of the teachings of Jesus, but here in Galatians, I believe we are shown a little bit of something different, and we nuance these words, and we begin to understand what the authors might have been meaning, then we begin to understand how God is speaking to us through them. Have you ever heard of a donkey or a mule called a beast of burden? Isn't there a song about that? Right, what's the song? I could hear it, but I don't know. It's just called Beast of Burden? Okay. I was right, all right. Were you singing it?
I was. I don't want to upstage you.
Oh, okay. Oh, shenanigans. Okay. All right. Here's my point. It's not a burden because that animal is carrying it. It's not a burden because that animal is carrying it. It's a burden because it's an excess of what the human being who is bringing that animal had. You see, a burden is an excess. A burden is more than you can carry on your own. A burden is the extra that goes along with life at certain points in time. The law of Christ calls us to, it says, burden is a weight that carries personal and eternal significance. It is an excess, something more that can be bore at this one point in time. Now, let's keep going because we're going to get to verse 5, and we're going to see how they tie together. Let's go down to verse 3. If anyone thinks that they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. If you think you are too important to help someone, you are only fooling yourself. You are not that important. Now, we just kind of need to hear that from time to time, don't we? You see, God calls us to examine ourselves. Having children has made something clear to me, and I've thought up this analogy. And when I worked in youth ministry, I used to see it because that's one of the critical times when parents and children begin to kind of diverge, and they set a trajectory that sometimes they'll never come back from. But one of the ways, this metaphor that I began to put together for it, it may or may not be right, but when children are born, they are supporting characters in my movie, right? I'm the lead character. I'm like the above the title name on the movie, right? Like when you're going to go see a movie, you ask who's in it. You don't mean all the supporting characters, right? You just mean the 2 or 3 names that are up above it. Well, when a child is born, they're supporting characters in our movie, but there comes a time, usually around the teenage years, where they realize that they are the lead actor or actress in their own movie. And they're not asking you to be supporting characters. Eventually, they're just going to ask you not to be in it. right? They're going to invite you to go find another casting call and do something else. But eventually, one day, you're going to come back together and realize perhaps that you're lead actors in both of your own stories. And then you'll actually get to a place of maturity and realize that you're just supporting actors in a story that's larger than either one of you to begin with. But there's this time where we begin to wrestle. And Jesus is telling us here, or actually this is Paul in Galatians, God is telling us here that we need to make sure we don't think too highly of ourselves. Well, how does this apply to this, Stephen? Don't we like being the heroes? Don't we want to be Superman or Wonder Woman, and we want to swoop in someone's time of need? And we want to be the white knight on the white stallion, and we want to get there and we just want to save them and swoop them up and feel good about ourselves and just save the day. Well, I'm not sure that that's who God is calling us to be in these situations and these boundary places where we need to have some boundaries. We need to stop thinking that perhaps we're the white knight who's going to come and save the day. And perhaps we actually let Jesus Christ be who Jesus Christ is in that person's life. And we let that person begin to believe that they are the only lead actor in their own life and that no one's going to get them out of this predicament except for themselves. Verse 4, we continue on. Each one should test their own actions. We have to ask ourselves, am I carrying what is appropriate for me, or am I carrying a burden so big that I need someone else to assist me? Am I carrying something that someone else should be carrying, or am I helping them through a time in their life when they have a little bit extra and they need a helping hand? Let's go to the end of verse 4. Never mind. They can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own load. Now leave that one up there for me, Travis. Each one should carry their own load. And when we began to break down what this word load means and what this word burden means, a load is an amount that you can carry on your own. Each one of us carries our own load everywhere that we go. We carry what has been given to us. We carry some of the problems that we have. We carry some of the things that weigh us down. We each have our own load. We maybe even call it our own cross to bear. But there are times when it balloons out of proportion and it is in excess and it becomes a burden. My kids are great at this. Did y'all know that emotions are hard? I don't know if y'all knew that. But when kids are small, it's like really easy to see. I apologize that all my analogies this morning have to do with kids, all my illustrations. But I see my children, and we joke around, and maybe it's not funny. We call them little emotional terrorists sometimes. They come into the middle of a situation, and they just use emotions to get their way, whatever they want. And if they can't get what they want, they're just kind of happy to wreak havoc. You know, they're great kids, I promise. My wife's probably giving me the stink eye. But they'll just wreak havoc, throw a tantrum, or do whatever it is. They let their emotions just absolutely overflow, and they have this burden. They have more than they can deal with. They begin to be insecure. Their emotions run over. They try to make other people feel the way that they do, and they have this extra. But this is how some of our relationships go. Some people who can't deal with their own problems or their own life circumstances, the things that they continue to put themselves into, and they begin to give those problems to you. And we, people who are trying to be healthy and live in peace the way that God would call us to, have to ask ourselves, are we carrying what they should be carrying for themselves, or are we carrying this little bit extra for them at this moment? And the answer to that question is extremely difficult. I don't know the answer. My kids were talking in school this week. They actually started talking about drugs. My kids are 8 and 6 and 3, and about to be 1. That's what I was going to say, 3. But in school, they were talking to them about drugs, and I was actually thinking, this is great. Because I want them to hear about one of the things that terrifies me the most is that they would get stuck in a cycle of addiction at some point in their life and you absolutely lose them. I was telling Nikki, I was like, I cannot imagine what a parent must go through when their child is stuck in addiction, and how many times you would go back and back and back and help and help and help, and every time you think this next time is the one, every treatment, the next treatment is the one, and when would you ever stop giving? You would probably never stop giving. They could deplete everything you had, waste you down to nothing, and take everything that you have possibly ever earned or brought together, all the stamina from your very body, and perhaps you would never stop giving. That's probably what I would do. But there may come a point where we have to admit that when we do draw a boundary, even in a time such as that, which would be unbelievably hard, we are actually setting them up with the opportunity to get what they need. That God is calling us to say that when we begin to set these boundaries, we actually cannot just have peace in our life, but we give someone else the opportunity to work towards peace in their own life. If you've ever had anybody in your life that asks you for money constantly, what happens if you keep giving them money? They keep asking for it. And when you stop giving it to them, maybe sometimes they get themselves in a lot of trouble. But perhaps one day they'll actually figure out what it is to live on what they actually make and no longer ask you for all that you have. So this is the hardest step in this series. You see, we talked about apologizing. We talked about when we have wronged someone, going to them and admitting that we had done something wrong, and that is so terribly difficult. We talked about when somebody has wronged us, going to them individually and putting ourselves in a situation where we begin to confront them or have a conversation with them about how they've wronged us. We've talked about thinking about how a relationship may never actually have peace in it again, but I believe that this is the hardest step, actually finding and setting a boundary in our lives that we're not going to cross and that we're going to live within, and we believe we will actually find peace within. So here's our kind of practical walkaways. We're going to go to the next slide. Step one is finding our boundary. Let's go to the next one. I'm sorry, Travis. And when I say find your boundary, I mean learn the difference between your load and someone else's burden, to use the words from Galatians. To find the difference between your load, what you should be carrying, what you rightfully should be carrying, and what somebody else's extra amount that is spilling over. Maybe perhaps it's just a one-time thing and we begin to help them, but if it's an all-the-time thing, I believe they have taken their load and they have given it to you. It's not a burden. It's what they should have been carrying on their own. And you need to invest in healthy relationships. A lot of times when we have someone in our life that is constantly draining us and has a need for whatever reason it may be, that begins to be the only relationship in our life because it can be so draining and time-consuming. It's all that we think of. It's all the conversations that we're involved in. It's like the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. We have to begin to invest in healthy relationships with people within our own boundary who bring us peace and understanding and who give us wisdom and who will help us understand where our boundaries may actually lie. Jesus says, "My burden is light." My burden, Jesus says, is light. He even uses the word portion, a part that is for you. God did not design us for a one-sided relationship. We have seen that since the beginning of time. But in these places where we have conflict and bad blood, sometimes they can turn into a one-sided relationship where you are doing all of the giving and all of the trying, and someone is just simply doing all of the taking and enjoying the fruits of your labor or whatever it may be. That's not the relationship that we see modeled in Jesus Christ. That's not the relationship we see modeled in the Holy Trinity. It's a relationship of giving and taking, of repentance and forgiveness, of acceptance and health and peace and truth and honesty. These are the relationships that God is calling us to. And when we live in a place where we are depleted to near nothing, we don't have anything else to give to anyone else. God can't use us for other things because we have given everything we have to somebody who's not going to return that favor. And I'm not here to say that this is easy. It is so hard, and it is such ambiguous work, and it is so difficult. But I'm here to plant the seed this morning that God is calling you to a life of peace. And that may actually require some boundaries in your life that people who have been crossing them for years or decades may have to begin to live with. But I believe that God is calling you to be a person who has boundaries so that you can be all of who God is calling you to be. Let us pray.